The Princess and the Spring Dragon. The meadow had always been a sacred secret, nestled deep within the heart of the kingdom, hidden by veils of mist that lifted only with the coming of spring. For centuries, the land awoke each year to the touch of a creature unlike any other. A dragon so small it could curl beneath the shadow of an oak, yet mighty enough to transform the world with a single breath. Verdance, the dragon of emerald scales, brought not fire but life, exhaling blooms where frost clung and coaxing rivers from dry stones. Princess Elara, guardian of this sacred meadow, walked its borders each dawn, her steps quiet against the dew-covered grass. The air here was always fragrant with the promise of renewal, and the flowers shimmered as if painted by a divine hand. But this morning, something was wrong. The meadow was still, unnaturally so. No birds sang. No wind rustled the leaves of the ancient willows. The brook, usually a bubbling melody, was silent, its water frozen mid-flow. Elara's breath misted in the chill air as her heart quickened. Her boots pressed against the stiffened grass, and as she knelt to touch it, the green blades crumbled into ash. She turned her gaze toward the shrine at the meadow's heart, where the dragon always stirred when the sun's first light spilled over the horizon. A low stone altar stood beneath an arch of ivy and silver blossoms, but today the ivy hung limp, its leaves curling into brittle grey. The shrine's once glowing basin, where Verdance would drink before spreading its life-giving magic, was empty, dark as a moonless sky. "Verdance!" she called, her voice faltering in the heavy air. Nothing answered, save for the whisper of her name carried on a sudden breeze. Elara. It was no friendly call, but a cold, dissonant echo, like the crack of ice on a frozen lake. Her hand tightened around the golden charm that hung from a chain at her neck. Shaped like a dragon's scale, it had been her mother's gift. A talisman of protection, the queen had said, though Elara had never understood its power. Now, as her fingers brushed its smooth surface, it grew warm, faintly pulsing like a heartbeat. "Elara!" The voice came again, louder this time, and she spun toward the sound. Shadows spilled into the meadow, pooling like ink beneath the trees. A shape emerged, tall and cloaked in darkness, with eyes that burned like embers. The figure stretched a hand toward the shrine, and in an instant, the ivy shriveled and fell away. "The dragon is no more," the figure rasped, its voice a blend of thunder and whisper. "Its power belongs to me now." Elara's pulse raced, but she held her ground. "Who are you? What have you done to Verdance?" The figure chuckled, a low, menacing sound that sent shivers through her. "You speak as though you can undo what has been done. The meadow's life has been stolen, Princess, and with it the dragon. Return to your kingdom and accept the withering of spring." Before she could demand more, the figure dissolved into shadow, retreating with the wind until the meadow was once again empty. empty of life, of warmth, of hope. Elara sank to her knees, her gaze fixed on the lifeless shrine. Her mind raced with questions. Who could steal Verdance, a being bound to the land itself? And why? She had no answers, but one certainty crystallized within her heart. She could not allow the meadow to die. As she rose, the golden charm at her neck pulsed again, stronger this time. A melody drifted to her ears. A haunting, ancient tune she had heard in dreams but never awake. The notes seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere, weaving through the trees like an unseen thread. The melody pulled her forward, beyond the meadow's edge and into the forest, where the air grew thick with mist. Though fear clawed at her thoughts, she clutched the charm and stepped into the unknown. Somewhere ahead, the answers awaited her, and with them, the fate of Verdance and the kingdom itself. The forest beyond the meadow had always been a borderland of whispers and shadows, a place where even the bravest hunters tread lightly. Elara had ventured there only once as a child, guided by her mother's steady hand. But the memory of its cold, winding paths lingered like a phantom at the edge of her thoughts. Now, with the meadow's melody as her only guide, she stepped into the realm of twilight, her breath forming silver clouds in the chill air. The trees loomed overhead, their gnarled branches entwined in a canopy that devoured the light. As she walked, the melody grew fainter, a distant thread threatening to unravel. Each step carried her deeper into the silence, her only companions the crunch of brittle leaves beneath her boots and the faint pulse of the golden charm at her neck. It wasn't long before the path began to shift. What had once been a narrow trail twisted and stretched, splitting into a dozen directions. The air felt heavier here, as if the forest itself were alive and watching her. She paused, her eyes scanning the labyrinth of roots and shadows. The charm pulsed again, a faint warmth against her skin, but offered no direction. "Elara!" A voice, barely a whisper, echoed through the trees. She turned sharply, her heart pounding. "Who's there?" The shadows thickened, and from them emerged a raven, its feathers gleaming like polished obsidian. It perched on a low branch, tilting its head as it regarded her with eyes that shimmered like starlight. "You seek the dragon," the raven said, its voice rich and melodic, yet tinged with something ancient and strange. "But the path ahead is not yours to walk freely." Elara stared, struggling to mask her surprise. "What do you mean? Where has Verdance been taken?" The raven flapped its wings, a slow, deliberate movement that stirred the air around it. "The Spire of Night, where shadow reigns. But beware, princess. Each step closer will cost you something." "Are you willing to pay the price?" "I must," Elara said, her voice steady though her heart quaked. "The meadow's life depends on it. My kingdom depends on it." The raven chuckled, a sound like rustling leaves. "Brave words, but bravery is not enough. The path will test your heart, your resolve, and the truths you hide even from yourself." With that, it took flight, its wings cutting through the mist as it soared deeper into the forest. Elara hesitated for only a moment before following, her steps quickening as she struggled to keep the bird in sight. The forest seemed to resist her progress, the trees closing in and the roots rising like claws to snare her feet. As the raven led her, its riddling voice drifted back through the shadows. "Why does the princess care for the dragon? Is it duty or something more? What binds you to its fate, Elara?" She stumbled over a root, catching herself just in time. The raven's questions gnawed at her. The dragon had always been more than a guardian of spring to her. It was a symbol of hope, a living connection to her late mother's teachings. But how could she explain that to a creature born of mystery? "The dragon's fate is the kingdom's fate," she replied, her voice firm. "If it perishes, so does the land. I will not let that happen." The raven's only answer was a caw, sharp and mocking, as if to say, "We shall see." Finally, the forest began to thin, and Elara emerged into a clearing where the mist swirled like restless spirits. In the center stood a crumbling stone archway, its surface etched with symbols that glowed faintly in the dim light. Beyond it lay a new path, narrower and darker than the one she had followed. The raven perched atop the archway, its gaze piercing. "This is the threshold, princess. Once you cross, there is no turning back. Beyond lies the Spire of Night, where the sorcerer waits." Elara approached the archway, her grip tightening on the golden charm. She could feel the weight of the raven's warning, but her resolve did not falter. "Then I will go," she said, stepping beneath the arch. As she passed through, the melody that had guided her fell silent. The forest behind her vanished, swallowed by shadow, and the path ahead stretched into an endless void. For the first time, doubt whispered at the edges of her mind. But with Verdance's image burning bright in her heart, she pressed on, the raven's riddles lingering like a shadow on her soul. The path beyond the archway was unlike anything Elara had ever seen. It twisted and coiled like the body of a serpent, the ground beneath her feet shifting as if alive. Blackened trees rose like skeletal hands on either side, their branches clawing at a sky obscured by endless shadow. The air was sharp with a bitter chill that cut through her cloak, and yet her golden charm grew warmer with each step, pulsing like a second heartbeat. The Spire of Night loomed ahead, a jagged column of obsidian that seemed to pierce the heavens. Its surface gleamed as though wet, reflecting faint, distorted shapes that moved though nothing stirred. As Elara approached, a thick fog rolled in, curling around her feet and muffling the sound of her steps. At the base of the spire stood a gate, forged from iron twisted into the likeness of coiling serpents. It creaked open as she neared, as if beckoning her inside. Beyond it lay a vast chamber, its walls lined with mirrors that reflected not her image, but fractured scenes from her life. Her first steps in the meadow as a child, her mother's warm embrace, the day Verdance first emerged to greet her. Each memory flickered like a candle caught in a draught, threatened by the darkness pressing in. A voice, low and resonant, echoed through the chamber. "Welcome, Princess Elara." She turned sharply, her gaze locking onto a figure seated on a throne of jagged ice. The sorcerer's face was obscured by a hood, but his eyes burned like twin embers, their gaze heavy with malice and ancient power. Shadows coiled around him like living things, shifting and writhing as he rose. "You have come far," he said, his voice smooth yet edged with cruelty. "Few would dare to enter my domain. Fewer still would leave." "I've come for Verdance," Elara replied, her voice steady though her hands trembled. "Return the dragon and I will leave without quarrel." The sorcerer laughed, a sound that reverberated through the chamber like the tolling of a bell. Bold words for one so small. "Tell me, princess, why do you seek to save the dragon? Is it truly for your kingdom's sake, or for your own pride?" Elara's jaw tightened, but she did not falter. "The dragon's life is bound to the land. Without it, the meadow will wither, and winter will consume everything. I will not let that happen." The sorcerer stepped closer, his shadows trailing behind him like a living cloak. "A noble sentiment," he mused, "but nobility alone will not save you. You see, the dragon is mine now, its power a gift to fuel my reign. With Verdance, I will weave an eternal winter, a world where life bends to my will or perishes beneath my frost." Elara's hand went to the charm at her neck, its warmth steadying her resolve. "The dragon was not meant for you," she said. "Its power is one of renewal, not destruction. You cannot bend it to your will." "Cannot?" The sorcerer's voice sharpened, and for a moment, the air in the chamber grew so cold that frost bloomed on the mirrors. "I already have." He raised a hand, and from the shadows emerged an image of Verdance, caged in ice that shimmered with unnatural fire. The dragon's once brilliant emerald scales were dull and cracked, its wings limp against its sides. Elara's breath caught, her chest tightening at the sight. "I will make you an offer," the sorcerer said, his tone softening like the lull before a storm. "Return to your kingdom. Forget the dragon. Forget this meadow. In exchange, I will spare your people from my winter's wrath. Refuse, and I will ensure not only the meadow, but the entire kingdom falls to frost." Elara's heart pounded, her mind racing. The sorcerer's words were a blade, cutting into the edges of her resolve. But as her gaze lingered on Verdance, a spark of defiance ignited within her. "No," she said, her voice clear and unwavering. "I will not abandon the dragon. I will not abandon my people. Do what you will, but I will fight to save them." The sorcerer's eyes blazed with fury, and the shadows surged around him like a storm. "So be it," he hissed. "You have sealed your fate, princess." The chamber trembled, the mirrors cracking and splintering as the darkness closed in. Elara clutched the charm, its light flaring against the encroaching shadows, and prepared herself for the trials that lay ahead. She would not surrender, not to the sorcerer, not to the darkness, and not to despair. The shadows surged like a tidal wave, and Elara's world dissolved into darkness. For a moment, she felt weightless, as though suspended in an endless void. Then, with a shattering roar, the air around her cracked and fell away like glass. She landed hard on the frozen floor, her breath leaving her in a sharp gasp. The chamber had transformed. Ice encased the walls and ceiling, shimmering with an eerie, unnatural light. At the room's center, encircled by jagged shards of frost, lay Verdance, bound in a cage of ice that pulsed with a fiery glow. The dragon's scales, once a vibrant emerald, were dulled to a pale green, its wings folded and lifeless. Elara's heart twisted at the sight. She stepped forward, her boots crunching against the brittle frost. The golden charm at her neck burned with an almost unbearable heat, as though urging her onward. As she approached the cage, Verdance's eyes flickered open, their once bright glow dim, but still filled with a spark of recognition. "Verdance," she whispered, reaching out a trembling hand. The dragon shifted weakly, the cage tightening around it in response. A low, mournful sound escaped its throat, a song of sorrow and longing that resonated through the icy chamber. Elara felt it in her very soul, a melody that spoke of the meadow, of spring's promise, of life itself held captive by despair. "Elara!" The voice of the sorcerer echoed from the shadows, his presence filling the room with a suffocating chill. He emerged, his cloak of darkness trailing behind him like smoke. "You persist, despite my warnings. But do you truly think you can free the dragon? Its power is bound to my will now." Elara turned to face him, her hand still resting on the charm. "Your will is not absolute," she said, her voice steady. "The dragon's power is born of life and renewal. It cannot be wielded by one who thrives on destruction." The sorcerer laughed, his voice a jagged edge cutting through the air. "Such naivety. You think the dragon's power is beyond my grasp? Watch and learn, princess." He raised his hand, and the cage of ice glowed brighter, its fiery sheen intensifying. Verdance writhed in pain, its song rising to a desperate crescendo. Elara felt the echoes of the dragon's agony, a deep ache in her chest that threatened to overwhelm her. But as the melody grew louder, so too did the heat of the charm against her skin. The golden scale began to glow, its light cutting through the darkness like a blade. Elara gasped as a surge of energy coursed through her, and she instinctively pressed the charm against the cage. The moment the charm touched the ice, a brilliant flash of light erupted, blinding both Elara and the sorcerer. The cage cracked and splintered, each shard falling away like petals from a dying flower. Verdance stirred, its scales regaining their luster as the light from the charm enveloped it. "No!" the sorcerer roared, his voice trembling with rage. Shadows coiled around him, gathering into a storm of darkness. "You will not take it from me!" Verdance rose, its wings unfurling with a mighty gust of wind that swept through the chamber. Its emerald scales gleamed with renewed brilliance, and its eyes burned with a fierce light. The dragon let out a roar that shook the very foundations of the spire, and the melody it carried transformed into a song of defiance and hope. The sorcerer struck, his shadows lashing out like serpents, but Verdance met them with a blast of searing green flame. The darkness recoiled, hissing and writhing as it burned away. Elara stood beside the dragon, the charm in her hand glowing with a light that matched Verdance's fire. "Together," she whispered, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. Verdance roared again, and the chamber exploded into light. The sorcerer's shadows were consumed, his form dissolving into smoke as he let out a final anguished cry. The ice melted away, the walls of the spire collapsing into streams of silver that flowed into the earth. When the light faded, Elara found herself standing in an open field, the sky above her clear and filled with stars. Verdance stood beside her, its gaze steady and filled with gratitude. The golden charm in her hand was now a simple scale, its power spent, but its warmth lingered in her palm. The dragon spread its wings, the melody of renewal filling the air once more. Elara smiled, her heart swelling with relief and triumph. "Let's go home," she said softly, and together they rose into the night, the meadow awaiting its guardian's return. The flight back to the meadow was unlike anything Elara had ever known. Verdance carried her with effortless grace, its emerald scales shimmering like sunlight on water. Beneath them stretched a world still gripped by winter, its forests burdened by snow and rivers frozen in silence. Yet as they soared, a faint warmth began to ripple through the air, carried on the dragon's wings. It was the promise of spring, fragile yet unyielding, awakening from its slumber. When they reached the meadow, the sight stole Elara's breath. What had once been a sanctuary of life and light was now a desolate wasteland. The grass lay in brittle tangles, the trees stood as bare sentinels, and the brook, once vibrant, was little more than a silver thread trapped in frost. Overhead, the sky hung heavy with grey clouds, a veil that seemed unwilling to lift. Verdance descended, its claws brushing the frozen ground. As it folded its wings, the golden charm at Elara's neck pulsed faintly, its light dim but persistent. The dragon let out a low, rumbling sound, a song, ancient and filled with longing. The melody carried across the meadow, weaving between the barren trees and into the still air. Elara dismounted and stepped forward, her boots crunching against the frost. Her heart ached at the sight of the lifeless shrine, its ivy turned to ash and its basin dry as bone. She reached for the golden charm, holding it in her palm as it pulsed with a rhythmic warmth. "Verdance," she said softly, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. "This is your home. Your life is bound to this place, as it is to the kingdom. Together, we can restore it." The dragon lowered its head, its luminous eyes meeting hers. It let out a soft croon, a sound that resonated with her very soul. Then, with deliberate grace, it turned to the shrine and exhaled. A plume of emerald fire erupted from its jaws, curling like smoke as it engulfed the shrine. The ivy that had withered and died now sprang to life, vibrant green tendrils unfurling and climbing the archway. The basin filled with water, clear and shimmering, its surface rippling as though stirred by unseen hands. The fire spread across the meadow, not in destruction but in renewal. Frost melted away, replaced by soft emerald grass that shimmered like silk. Flowers bloomed in vibrant hues, golden daffodils, crimson poppies, and delicate bluebells, painting the meadow in a tapestry of colour. The brook began to flow, its waters singing as they danced over smooth stones. Elara watched in awe, her heart swelling with relief and joy. The dragon's song deepened, its melody carrying a power that seemed to resonate with the earth itself. Above them, the clouds began to part, revealing a sky of brilliant blue. Sunlight poured down, warm and golden, embracing the meadow in its light. The golden charm in Elara's hand grew warmer still, its glow merging with the light around her. She closed her eyes, and for a moment she felt the life of the meadow coursing through her, the pulse of the brook, the breath of the trees, the joy of the flowers bursting into bloom. She understood then what her mother had meant when she spoke of the bond between the meadow, the dragon, and their lineage. When she opened her eyes, the transformation was complete. The meadow was alive again, more vibrant and radiant than ever before. Verdance stood at its heart, its emerald scales gleaming in the sunlight, its wings folded in quiet triumph. Elara approached the shrine, her steps slow and deliberate. She placed the golden charm into the basin, where it sank and glowed faintly beneath the water. "Your power is safe now," she whispered. "It will remain here, bound to the land as it should be." The dragon let out a soft rumble of agreement, nuzzling her gently with its snout. Elara smiled, a tear slipping down her cheek. "You've given us life again," she said, "and I promise I will protect it." As if in response, the dragon spread its wings and took flight, its song echoing across the meadow. Elara watched as it disappeared into the horizon, its melody lingering in the air long after it was gone. The princess returned to her kingdom, her heart forever changed. She became not only a ruler but a guardian, one who understood the delicate balance between life and the land. Each spring, Verdance returned to the meadow, its song a reminder of the courage and sacrifice that had saved them all. And in the quiet moments, when the wind carried the scent of blooming flowers and the brook sang its gentle tune, Elara would stand in the meadow and remember the journey that bound her to the dragon and to the light that had triumphed over shadow.